It's 8 p.m. in Spain, and we'll bring you any breaking results of the Spanish general election. But it looks almost certain that the Rainbow Warrior so-called socialist coalition has gone down in flames. That doesn't mean the people coming after them are going to be any better. But the fact that at 6 p.m., just half of the people of Spain had voted in a closely, bitterly contested general election seems to buttress my opinion that nobody much cared for any of the parties contesting for the fight. The so-called socialists and their so-called socialist coalition partners, and the so-called conservatives and their so-called far-right partners seem to have scrapped it out amongst half of the electorate, outbidding each other in a Dutch auction of more and more misery for the working class people, the vast majority of people in Spain. The only difference is that in Joseph Borrell's backyard of his garden, even fewer people wanted to back the policies of austerity and war represented by a misnamed Socialist Party of Spain. It is a miserable situation where the only choice available to the Spanish people was dumb and dumber, was worse and worser. And that offer is the offer on offer all across the European Union. But the important thing is the government has fallen, just like the Dutch government has fallen. The French government is broken. The German government almost entirely bereft of public support. The British government is so unpopular that they held on to the one seat of 3 that they contested for last Thursday, and only because of the Rainbow Warrior nature of the so-called Labour opposition. That was Boris Johnson's seat in Uxbridge and Ruislip. In Uxbridge and Ruislip, Labour put up a trans cultist and failed to capture a seat that should have been theirs for the taking. In the Yorkshire constituency that the Conservative government lost, Labour put up a 25-year-old, who looks 15 by the way, a 25-year-old candidate, fresh from Oxford University, a job as a parliamentary researcher for one of Tony Blair's finest, whose first act in taking his £87,000 a year job was to tell poor people with more than 2 children that they could look for no mercy from Keir Starmer's Labour Party. And in the other constituency of 3, the Liberal Democrats, more rainbow, more warrior than even the other 2 parties, took the seat. Why do I say the picture is not clear? Because although the public opinion polls seem to indicate that Keir Starmer should have stormed to victory in all 3 constituencies, in fact, they won only one of them. And in the seat that the Liberal Democrats won, Labour got just over 1,000 votes. These are not the performances in real-time elections to be expected of a party that is expecting to romp home and form a majority government just over a year from now. As I said, in all 3 cases, the none of the above party won, just like they did, apparently, in Spain this very day. I think the political class in the European Union and in North America is being demonstrated to be so completely out of touch with their electorate that if only a critical mass could develop behind a credible leadership and a credible alternative political program, it would romp to power. Something like that might be happening in the United States. Despite an ocean load of smears, despite every difficulty facing him, including his own voice, Robert Kennedy is burning up the tracks. He's currently the most popular candidate in the field for President of the United States with a 47% favorability rating. That's 2% better than Donald Trump, but it's more than 17% better than Joe Biden, his opponent for the Democratic Party nomination. We had the grotesque spectacle this week of the House, Congress in America holding a hearing on censorship with the Democratic Party, whose member he is, doing everything they possibly could to censor Robert Kennedy. Robert Kennedy Jr. turned up at a censorship hearing and was censored by the Democrat representatives on the committee. But when he finally did get to speak, when a Republican gave over his time to Kennedy to speak, his excoriating, incredible, short burst of denunciation, hurling invective at his own party was so effective, it raised him $5 million in a single day for his campaign to be the President of the United States of America. But here's the rub. So desperate was his own party to rubbish him, smear him, silence him, it seems to me inconceivable that that party will allow him, even if he won every primary election, to be their nominee. And so, Mr. Kennedy, you are now rapidly approaching the point of no return. You're either going to have to fall into line and support Joe Biden, that you have amply demonstrated is utterly incapable of being President of the United States. You're going to have to fall into line behind a Democratic Party that has covered you from head to foot in ordure, has tried to gag you at every opportunity, has tried to rig every primary election that you are about to contest, or you're going to have to now make the necessary preparations to be an independent third-party candidate in the upcoming presidential polls in 2024. I very much hope that you will choose the latter course. For if you choose the former course, then like Bernie Sanders, you will have proved to be all mouth and no trousers. You will have proved to be a masochist, a cuckold that is ready to be humiliated by his own party and will fade away in ignominy in public consciousness. And I don't think someone with the name Robert Kennedy should take that course. Somebody called Henry Kissinger, aged 100, took an airplane to Beijing this past week. 100 years old, on a 14-hour airplane on which he could easily have perished, flew to Beijing and was treated to a right royal welcome. None of this Antony Blinken being met by a junior civil servant and nobody even to carry his bags. None of this Lloyd Austin business, to whom the Minister of Defense of China will not even pick up the phone. Oh no, Henry Kissinger was given a reception befitting of an American president himself. Why? Well, the answer to both questions, why and why make the journey, is the same. The danger of a war between the United States and China over Taiwan has now reached fever pitch. I know it's hard to believe that, bogged down as they are in a losing war, a rapidly accelerating losing war in Ukraine, with the Russian army bursting through collapsing lines of Ukrainian forces, now unable to be reinforced, even though in this so-called counteroffensive, American sources say they have lost 26,000 dead, which means 75,000 wounded, 100,000 dead and wounded in the counteroffensive alone. There are simply not enough Ukrainians of even remotely definable fighting age to fill the gaps that are now being left. And the Russian army is advancing 4, 5, 6 kilometers per day, breaking through lines that are crumbling before them as their counter-offensive elsewhere washes up against the ring of steel fortifications that Russia has constructed in the central area of the front line in the Donbass. More and more Western commentators are saying that this Ukrainian counteroffensive is doomed, is failing. It went from slowing to failing to doomed in the last 7 days. And in the Daily Telegraph, which is not short of war fervor for the Ukrainian side, it speculated this week that the West and Ukraine are facing imminent disaster. Not what my words, but the Daily Telegraph's words. Imminent disaster. It would seem that the Russian advance can go on just as long, just as far, and just as comprehensively as the Russians decide that it will. We're very lucky then, or the Germans are, or maybe not, that it's quite likely that the Russian advance will stop before it reaches Berlin. But not content with one losing war after another in the last year and a half, the debacle in Afghanistan, followed by the imminent disaster in Ukraine, the danger of an American-China war has rapidly ramped up. And that presumably, and I say this advisedly, is the reason Kissinger flew to China. We'll hear from an expert in China in the course of this show on what this trip was all about and what its likelihood of a successful outcome might have been. Lastly, if 2 wars was not enough, the United States seems embarked upon a war with Iran. I know, a war on 3 fronts. What could possibly go wrong? Fighting Russia, China, and Iran all at the same time, with an ailing economy, with a president who doesn't know where he is. What could possibly go wrong? But the US is doubling down in Syria, sending thousands of new soldiers to illegally occupy parts of Syria which border Iraq, which borders Iran. Many people believe, and I am among them, that they are seeking a provocation in Syria as a casus belli to launch military aggression against Iran. And if they do, it may be their biggest mistake yet, because Iran is more than capable of hitting them back, and of hitting their proxy back, with all guns blazing. Iran's own weapons and the weapons of Iran's allies in the region will rain down fire and destruction in the Persian Gulf, but maybe as far away as the Levant itself. We'll be talking about all these subjects, plus a subject that you might not anticipate that we will: the travails of Alec Baldwin and the shooting dead of an actress on set in Hollywood in the United States of America. It's a more interesting and fundamentally important story than you might have thought, because it goes to the heart of the US justice system itself. Fasten your seatbelts. This is the mother of all talk shows.